I got to click on our YouTube profile picture for this time.
Huh. You ready to get started?
Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 119 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, the qualifiers are already back for the CDL. A quick turnaround in the Call of Duty League, and we'll get to them near the end of this episode. And before that, we will talk about Black Ops 6. We'll be talking about at least one last roster change, possibly the last roster change of this CDL season, and it is a very fitting one. We got a coaching change, and we got some other stuff that we were planning to talk about that we might not talk about depending on how long this show goes, or how short it goes, rather. But before we get to any of that, how you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. For starters, happy Memorial Day weekend to all our listeners and viewers in the U.S. But yeah, no, I think big thing here. We don't have a ton to talk about, but we are approaching the end of the online segment of the CDL season. So get you guys ready for the first week of those qualifiers next weekend. But yeah, we got some decent stuff to talk about first, so we might as well jump right in.
Let's talk about the roster news first, just because that's kind of like the most relevant thing to the actual CDL. The Boston Breach, who we talked quite at length about this entire season, but especially last week in our Major 3 Breakdown podcast episode. The Boston Breach are in last place in the CDL, and I believe they've lost 10 in a row, if I'm not mistaken. 10 consecutive losses, 13 of their last 14. And they are by far in last place. And as we discussed last week, all but eliminated from contention to qualify for CDL champs at the end of the year, which is unique because they are literally the only team that probably doesn't have a shot at this point. But they have decided that in the face of that, despite the season being all but over for them in terms of relevance, they are going to make one last roster change, or they might make another one or 3 more depending on how things go, but they're making one more at least, and that is bringing in Major Maniac to replace Pentagram. So Pentagram gets a stage, right? He came in before the Major 3 qualifiers. He did the qualifiers and then Major 3. He did not win a single match in the CDL, quite unfortunately, and definitely not completely his fault because they were already on a pretty downward slide before he came into the roster, but he's out, and Major Maniac, formerly of Atlanta FaZe, I think Minnesota Rocker, the Mutineers. I'm not sure if there's any other teams that I'm missing, but he's definitely a CDL veteran, a Call of Duty veteran. He will be taking Pentagram's spot in the Boston Breach starting lineup. What are your first thoughts on this? This was announced, I believe, on Friday. So it caught me by surprise. I definitely wasn't expecting it, but what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting it. I think it was Jacob Hale who did some of the potential scenarios for Boston to even like tie for uh 9th or 8th place or whatever. It's like they're like
Yeah.
50 points and like to get the 70 points, you obviously can have a 7-0 stage, which historic
Ridiculous.
compared to their 0-7 performance. Or you sprinkle some online wins in, and then you got to win 2 matches on land for 30. So you win 4 matches online, go 4-3, which is still a drastic improvement over the last set of qualifiers. And then you have to win 2 matches on land to get 30 points or 15 to get to 70, and that only gets you into a tie. That's like taking into account the teams at 120 now,
Mm-hmm.
not winning at all. So outside looking in, it looked very, very bleak for Boston's chances of making champs, and I wasn't expecting them to make another move
Yeah.
because of that. Um, but I think maybe a little glass half full perspective here. I guess we've talked about the Paris and Vegas franchise historically in the CDL being unwilling to make moves, and in past seasons and whatnot. This is a case of an org still being proactive, even when it seems like
Mm-hmm.
there's a very, very slim chance of them making it to the postseason. Um, so that's, and I think Boston's been pretty good about that, in its good time in the CDL. But to me, the bigger thing is like this is just a super risky move for Major Maniac. I believe I just tried to look it up and I couldn't find the placings for the last Challengers tournament in at the Toronto Major. I don't know if they're not yet or whatnot, or I'm just dumb and can't find them. I thought I saw him like because I believe he was playing with Paul X, and I thought they were in the finals against FaZe Black, and they lost. Um, I'm not 100% sure. I might have just been seeing stuff, but um, regardless, like Major Maniac taking this chance to sign with this team when it's so um unlikely that they make champs, whereas he has the potential to compete at in challengers champs if he plays well and can theoretically make more money there. That's just a huge risk. But again, you can say like you don't want to turn down a chance to play in the pro league, and
Mm-hmm.
this could be an opportunity for him to showcase his talent again that we've seen over the years, and um, boost his stock a little bit heading into next season. At the same time, too, the move itself, from a player standpoint, makes sense just because Major Maniac in his CDL career has been a part of some really strong search and destroy teams. He himself um, has had some, strong performances in search and destroy, and that's the mode like I think of him as a player. I'm not thinking of him as a guy who's going to go out there and drop 40 kills, but he's the guy who on that Atlanta FaZe team back in MW 2019 would be sitting in that P2 on Hackney Yard for just 60 seconds while the other 4 guys on his team were getting all the kills, and he had no problem just soaking the 60 seconds in the hill while everyone else was getting the kills. I remember vividly there was like I guess not I can't remember the exact numbers, but I know there was a case where he like was on that hill and had like very few kills, and everybody else on the team just had the kills, and they were getting all the points because he was chilling in the hard point, didn't have to do anything but just sit there while the rest of Atlanta was getting uh, all the kills on the map and whatnot. So I don't think of him as a guy who's going to come into this lineup and drop 40 kills a game. He's going to come in and make the fundamental plays, which could help someone like Snoopy, who's still trying to learn and develop as a player. And the big thing that we've talked about with Boston over these last couple weeks and months has been, their losses in game 5 and losses that they had like a 10 loss streak or 9 loss streak in search. Um, if you're looking for a guy in the challenger scene who has the potential to help out in search, it, the names that would potentially come before someone like Major Maniac are, not a lot of people come to mind. So, um, in terms of the fit and the move itself and what it could do to help this team, I think it makes sense and I like it, but it might just be too little too late. Like if
Mm-hmm.
if this happened major 3, or before Major 3, and they didn't have the 0-7 stage. I mean, you could make the argument they don't have the 0-7 stage because with Major Maniac, I feel pretty confident in saying he might have been able to help them win at least one of those game fives that they lost over these last couple of weeks, let alone, maybe a game 2 thrown in there that they don't even have to get to the game 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, it's a really risky move for Major Maniac himself. But like I said, if he just comes out and plays like he's capable of, he can potentially boost the stock and in the next season, help him get back into the league. But if this is another case of Boston just really struggling, they don't make champs, and then we look back and whatever team Major Maniac was on in Challengers makes a run at Challengers champs, like uh, from a financial standpoint, it could be a move that backfires in that regard. But if he comes out and plays like he's capable of, and this helps him get a team for next season in the pros, then it might be all worth it in the end.
Yeah, he was on Lore Gaming, and they got second at
Okay.
Challengers in Toronto. They lost to FC Black, which is Asim
Yeah.
and Brack's team and all that stuff. So, obviously it's a weird move for both sides, like you mentioned. Boston making another roster change, and this time it's Pentagram who kind of gets the Asim treatment of like, okay, you get a very limited window in which to prove yourself, and then you're out. And there's really no second chance there. And obviously, Pentagram has been waiting and waiting and waiting for his moment in the CDL. He was the LA Thieves substitute, 2 years ago. So it's obviously probably a big blow to him, and understandably so. I understand it from the point that it's kind of like an audition this last stage for Boston. They're trying to do whatever they can to, I would assume, put the right players around Shotzi, or not Shotzi, Snoopy. That would be something. But they're trying to put the right players around him, and you gotta figure that out, right? If he is going to be the guy in the future, if he's gonna stick around next year, and they plan to build around him, then this next month and a half is all about kind of auditioning players to see if they fit with him. And it's not necessarily about talent and like gun skill necessarily. It's more just about like, how do they personality wise mesh with him in game? Are they there to support him, or do they kind of take away from what he's good at? And that's a big part of it. I'm not really entirely sure. It's like we really didn't get a good look at Pentagram in that regard because the team is in such disarray that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly Pentagram's value to the team over the past month and a half. So, I feel bad for him, and I feel bad for just Boston fans in general that this team has been, pretty much such a train wreck over this season, and this will be almost certainly. I know you were saying that Jacob Hale was trying to lay out some unlikely scenarios, but it's not going to happen. Like, there is no New York Subliners kind of redemption arc here for them. They are what they are, and they will be ending their season with Major 4, probably a first round exit if I had to guess, just based on what they've shown this season. But it'll be interesting. I'll give them that. I wish them the best of luck, especially Major Maniac. And I definitely think that he could be making a mistake, but at this point, he's been on several CDL teams. He kind of feels like not necessarily in the same boat, but kind of in a similar boat as Gunless, where you just don't have like these options to be kind of turning down these opportunities. And maybe he can make the most of it and kind of give a good impression to those who are in power. Maybe that's Doug Spencer Martin. We don't know. People are calling him the shadow GM or whatever for Boston. So that's pretty interesting. Another piece of not necessarily roster news, but roster related news. The Miami Heretics, they released Gaberi. Is that how you say it? Noel Gaberi. I'm not Garberi. I butchered that name, but he was formerly the head coach of Miami Heretics. He was announced at the beginning of the season when the Heretics announced their roster. They announced like a 6-man team, if I'm not, or a 5-man team or whatever, and then they announced 2 coaches. One being Method Zick, which was he was a player on the former CWL version of the Heretics, and Noel was also part of this. And I think they were both listed as head coaches or both listed as coaches. I'm not sure exactly what the roles of them are, but the Heretics, despite having literally their best weekend of Call of Duty all season, this was the time that they decided to release him. I'm not sure if this was just something that kind of happened. That it was just a bad coincidence that they were planning to release him all along, but it seems weird that they would do it at this point in time. Your thoughts? Obviously, we don't know much about him, really much at all about him, but I mean, it does seem a little odd, does it not?
I'm, I'm not gonna lie. I honestly had never heard of this guy until the news was dropped that
Yeah.
announced. And I mean, I even put it in the notes here that he wasn't a part of the original announcement because on August 24th, Miami puts out the tweet announcing Lucky Metals, Eric Boom, Journey, Vickle, and Method Sick. They have emojis next to the name, and Method Sick. Method Sick is like a suit with a tie on, kind of signaling he was the coach. And I had never even saw that there was a reply to this saying that like that this guy, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, uh, is also a part of it. So I'm really confused why he just wouldn't have been a part of that initial announcement and graphic too. I don't really know. Um, so that's kind of I was really surprised to begin with because I just thought Method Sick was the coach this whole time, and yeah, so I don't know. I mean, uh, from the perspective that you just brought up there of like saying that this was their best performance and now they're moving on from one of their coaches, that is definitely a bit strange and not entirely sure what's going on there. But um, I think all things considered, that it, if this doesn't affect the team in a negative way, that Miami is potentially playing their best Call of Duty at the right time and on a good trajectory to make it the end of the season here. So we'll have to see how big of a role this change plays in the team dynamic or anything like that. But honestly, I can't really
Yeah.
speak on him or what he means to the team or anything because for this announcement, I had no idea he was even a part of the team.
Yeah, I mean, like I think I had seen his name, but I don't really know what some of these coaches and analysts like what their actual role is. I know some teams have multiple coaches, and I'm sure they kind of
Yeah.
break down the responsibilities. But I'm definitely not in tune with the coaching staff of the Miami Heretics, to say the least. We can move on just on that. Black Ops 6 announced this past week, which is that's cool. I mean, Treyarch coming back into the fold. It feels like a long time since that, but it really hasn't been that long. And the full reveal date was confirmed to be for Sunday, June 9th, which is the Xbox Game Showcase. So in 2 weeks from now, we'll get a actual reveal of Black Ops 6. Your thoughts? Obviously, we don't really know anything about the game necessarily, but it's exciting just to have Treyarch back in general.
Yeah, I mean that's the number one thing I'm most excited about. I mean, I feel like I've said it on previous podcasts when episodes when we've been talking about the next Call of Duty before we even knew it was Black Ops 6 when we knew it was a Treyarch game.
Mm-hmm.
But over these last few years, there have been so many complaints. First off, I feel like potentially MW3 has been like the least complained about COD in comparison to a lot of the other ones. That might just be,
It was an
it might
MW2
be
reskin.
it's the one I've played the least over the last few years, so maybe it's just me being less in tune in that sense. But uh, regardless, just some of these games in recent years have not been well received by the community. That's putting it.
Yeah.
But the light at the end of the tunnel seemingly has always been that another Treyarch game was coming. And Treyarch has been the savior of not only competitive COD, but in many people's eyes, just the COD franchise in general. Um, Especially from a competitive COD standpoint, though, they seem to listen the most to feedback and stuff like that, from the pros and whatnot. So, um, there's a lot riding on this game, and they've had the most amount of development time to work on it. I think it's going to be 4 years by the time it's all said and done and releases this fall. I think I saw like rumors on Twitter and stuff that the devs have hinted at them play testing this game for almost 2 years now. Um, there's just a lot riding on how good this title is, and there are high expectations of it, seemingly higher than uh, in some of the recent years, and that could be again due to the Treyarch effect. It also could be due to people just waiting so long for another Treyarch game that they're just like, please just give me this and be good, and we need something. So, I'm excited for the reveal. I mean, obviously, this is the undisputable COD cycle that just inevitably pops up every year, where it's like we don't even get to the end of the current game and we're already getting leaks and stuff for the next game, and this is the showcase is gonna happen not even before champs this year. So, um, yeah, I mean, it seems like we're getting to that point where we're talking about the next game. People are gonna get excited about it and whatnot. But I just really hope that this is the game that from a competitive standpoint, or not even just from a holistic standpoint. I just hope it's a really good one, and I know there are obviously a lot of people who are hopeful for that as well. So, we'll have to see what we end up getting. Obviously, the reveals that always happen aren't like too you know over the top or anything. They kind of
Yeah,
just
they're like movie
you know
trailers almost.
yeah, they show a little bit, and then we get the multiplayer reveal down the road, and sometimes they do like cases where they bring some pros and whatnot or streamers and
Hmm.
actually play the game. So, um, even if we don't get a lot coming up here soon in the initial reveal, we're getting to that point of the year where we're gonna start seeing some more stuff for this new game. And even before we just went live here, like less than an hour ago, I saw Noah J tweet out something. He got a package from Treyarch, teasing zombies being in the new game. Obviously, for a Treyarch game, that's kind of like assumed, but I guess maybe it hasn't technically been confirmed up until this point. I know a lot of people are hoping that round-based zombies will be making a return after this, DMZ-esque zombies mode in MWZ has, I think it's been pretty decently well received at launch, but then it like kind of just wasn't getting or hasn't been getting a ton of content in the season releases. I know it was either season 2 or season 3. Like they didn't even have like a major update at the season launch, and they waited until the mid season or season reloaded update to add some new stuff and whatnot. So, um, yeah, getting a little off track, but I know Black Ops 6 is coming. We know that for sure now. We just gotta wait to get more details and hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't play like nearly at all anymore, just because I don't really have the interest to kind of like put in that kind of time. And I'm sure like a lot of the people that are listening or watching in probably do have like that kind of interest. So like I don't want to be like one of those people that is just like overly negative about something that people are excited about. Um, just like, but like for me to be honest, like I'm just like not excited at all about it, because it feels like like you said, we're in the cycle of like people start getting excited about the new game or the next game that's 5-6 months out, and then we're inevitably kind of disappointed by whatever it may be. But if it's broken, or if it's just like not enough content, whatever it may be, it just feels like it's always not enough. And I don't know if that's just fan expectations, or if developers have done like a really poor job. I have my suspicions on which one of those two it is. But I mean, I think it'll be cool, just because I think people are more positive and like more patient with Treyarch a lot of times, because they have a good track record, or at least like they have like a perfect track record compared to a developer like IW, which they should never be able to touch another Call of Duty game in my opinion. So, but yeah, I think it'll be cool just to see people get excited about Call of Duty, and yeah, we'll see what happens come June 9th. Anything else that you want to talk about? Obviously, we have a few of these other points. I'm not sure if you want to talk about X Defiant because after 7,000 years, they have finally launched, and you got to play it a little bit. Any first impressions on X Defiant? Is Patty Akes is he doing a good job with his X Defiant?
I mean, it didn't feel like it wasn't anything super crazy or reinventing the wheel or anything like that, but it played a couple hours on launch night with Tremy, my cousin, and one of my other friends from home here, and we had fun. It was all right. Like I said, it didn't
Not a COD killer.
I don't think so. No, I know as many people like to meme and joke about that. I think some pretty drastic, uh, not necessarily changes, but they would have to I feel like I'm not wording it correctly, but it's not anything drastically different from Call of Duty enough to be a COD killer in my eyes. Like
Yeah.
it, it felt like a shooter. It felt good. It did. There are some gunfights where it felt like if I wasn't hitting the guy in the head, like I was just getting shredded and not doing damage. Um, but I mean, it has like that specialist X esque element to it with the characters and their abilities and whatnot. So, um, it was fun. It was all right. Gonna try and play it a little bit more. See if I have any other big takeaways from it. But I do think that the the one thing I've seen the most and people have been talking about a lot. I feel like is like the weapon progression and the leveling. But at this stage, like it's like season 0 for the game. There's really no like incentive to level, and it doesn't really matter if the weapon levels take a while because it's a free to play game, right? So like if there's there's nothing like pushing you to continue to level,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll just level the guns and whatnot eventually. Obviously, the attachments are linked to the levels, so that's why people want to level the guns. But from a player level perspective, there's nothing like, at least that I've seen, there's no reason to like try and like hit level whatever the max level is. Um, so that's something that might change. But again, this is season 0 launch. It's not even season. Um, so Patty Akes has some time to cook some more stuff up, and maybe that'll change my mind. But yeah, I mean, I had fun. Probably gonna play it again a little bit more here. See if think anything else of it. But to answer your question there in the middle there, I do not see it as the COD killer. I think Call of Duty has that brand identity now where
They're a cockroach. They cannot be killed.
I think that's a good way to put it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean from what I played, I forget what the even like the beta test or whatever it was, several months ago, when they thought it was going to be coming out pretty soon after that. Obviously, things did not happen like that, but when I played it, I didn't get the sense that it would like really catch Call of Duty players, like I think people always talk about like lapsed Call of Duty fans or like those who played like in COD 4 or MW2 like back in the day, and like how do you get those people back? One, like those people are like in their 30s a lot of times, and like they just don't want to play a sweaty COD game like modern day COD. But X Defiant like is sweaty. Like you can already tell like the way the playstyle works. Like it lends itself to cracked kids playing it.
There is no SBMM though right
Yeah.
now in X Defiant, so that's definitely noticeable. And yeah, I have my one buddy from home here who's not very good, and he's the type of guy we joke about, like we'll play Fortnite or at COD and be like, yeah, we're bringing him with us to bring down the SPMM a little, or the MMR a little bit, make the lobby a little easier. But obviously didn't have that effect in X Defiant. There are definitely some games where it was sweaty, but there were definitely some other games where Tremy was dropping like 60 kills against kids who weren't even shooting back. So
Mm-hmm.
it did, in that sense, have like a little bit of an old school COD feel to it. And obviously, you're not like it's a new game, so people might not have figured out the movement and whatnot yet. But like it's not you're not like slide canceling around every corner or just sliding
Yeah.
all over the map and whatnot. So in that sense, it is a little bit more like an older COD game. Um, but yeah, sorry for cutting.
No. I think the there is no COD killer. Like, I mean, the only COD killer would be, COD itself.
Yeah, yeah,
Microsoft or Activision. Like, those are the real COD killers in this. Because at the end of the day, like, it is such a big brand. It's, McDonald's, it's Coca-Cola. It's like the one of, if not the biggest, like gaming franchise or title like in history. It sells millions and millions and millions of copies just based on the name. Like, you don't even really need to see it. And some people barely play it and they still spend $60-$70 on it. I think like the only thing that really could really hurt COD is if a competent developer, and maybe will be Ubisoft with X Defiant, like it needs to be slower like than current COD, because I think that's kind of like a big problem is like every game has gotten faster and faster and faster, where Halo back in the day you couldn't even sprint. Now you can sprint. Like, that's just like a small thing. Obviously with COD, if you go back to COD 4 MW2, even with marathon sprint, it's a completely different game. Like, they don't play like all that similar. It feels a lot clunkier back in the day, to now, where slide canceling and a lot, you can kind of bunny hop to a certain extent. It's just a lot faster, which is probably a good thing to keep up with, kind of like just stimulating yourself over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, it's also kind of like old people probably don't want to play that. I mean, Fortnite is a great example where no build is very popular with a certain section of the audience, because yeah, it's a little too cracked to play with 13-year-olds who are just building and building and building. So that's a little bit of a little bit of a rant, but I think Call of Duty can't be killed. I definitely didn't think, from the hype or the lack thereof of the X Defiant launch, I didn't see that as like a like a big cut in on Call of Duty. And also Call of Duty responded by announcing Black Ops 6, which
That was really
I'm
funny.
I'm sure it was a coincidence, because I don't think
I don't think it was.
well, if it wasn't, it makes it even better. But it's just, they can do that at any time. They can
Yeah,
just throw out something that will be like, ooh, and people will just look at that for a week, and then X Defiant's like, where did all of our players go? So that's just kind of how Activision has, or Microsoft, or whatever the company is called now. That's just how they are, and that's how they have that ability at any given moment. Um, do you want to talk about this other stuff, Doug being homeless, or anything?
we can touch on it. Might as well.
So, I guess Doug Sensor Martin, if you weren't aware, he said this was at the beginning of the season, if I'm not mistaken. This wasn't like,
It might have been in the off season.
okay. So he said on Dexerto's Reverse Sweep podcast with Parasite and Aches and all of them. So he said that basically this roster for Optic that they had signed in the offseason with Kenny and Pred coming in and joining Dashy and Shotzi, that they would never win anything. They would, he would put his home on that, his house. Well, Optic won Major 3, and now Doug Sensor Martin is homeless. Any thoughts, Bink?
I just think, I mean, that was a pretty bold statement to make.
Bold, putting it
That in your
lightly.
house. Obviously, Sensor isn't exactly hurting for money, so maybe he's just able to bet houses on
He's got
stuff like
gym
this.
money.
But well, I was gonna say, I don't think he's actually going to be giving up his house, which is another comparison to Jim there of saying things and not sticking to your word. But in all seriousness, I think the aspect there of him just saying like I believe like the crux of his point is like
It was based
Pred
on
with
Dashi, right?
yeah, it was like Pred with Dashi and Nazi or whatever, like just wasn't gonna work or whatever. And I mean, they obviously we had this conversation last week on the podcast of like raking them with Atlanta. I think we both kind of agreed at this point. It's kind of hard to put Optic definitively at number one. Probably do like a 1A Atlanta, 1B Optic sort of deal. Um, but either way, they've been one of the best teams in the league all season.
Yeah.
There was the stretch until this, leading up to this point at Major 3, where they had not lost to anybody outside of Atlanta for like 2 months. And then they followed that up by beating Atlanta and winning the tournament. So, yeah, I just think, the Optic team has a ton of talent, and it makes sense that get the job done. As we've mentioned, it obviously Greenwall expects that you ain't first your last mentality. So in their eyes, it may have taken a little bit longer than they would have liked, but especially in this season where been so dominant by the top half of the team, it's uh it's it's pretty impressive that they were able to get the job done here, and especially considering it'd been 805 days or whatever they said it was since Optic's last championship. Like, so to not to defend Doug or anything like that, but like, that could have been something being in his mind at that time, being like, Optic really hasn't won much with this Shotzi and Dashi core up to this point. But regardless of the clip and any context behind it and whatnot, it's uh now looking back on it, it's Optic are in a position to be playing their best COD at the right time, which is something we always talk about here. And they could potentially be heating up, and they win Major 4 and champs, that we're looking at a completely different narrative for this whole season, where in recent months it was kind of like the return of the Atlanta FaZe dynasty and them being unbeatable and whatnot. And Optic has an opportunity to completely just change the narrative around that. So I am excited to see how they're able to build off of this championship, right? Like I was just saying, Optic expects championships every time out. If they, at the end of the season, just win Major 3 and they don't win Major 4 or champs or both, like, what's the perception going to be around this team? That'll be something interesting to look at in a couple months. But end of the day, they just won the championship. So got to give them their flowers, and for now we got to wait and see what they do the rest of the way.
I just disagree with Doug, because it's like, if it was based on, New York has obviously a great roster coming into this season. They replaced Priesta with Sib, who's a very good player. And then there's obviously Atlanta bringing Andraza. Like, those two teams, I definitely could see those two teams being better than Optic, or having a better time fitting in their new acquisitions, versus Optic, who replaced half their roster, and there could be some kind of role friction between the guys like Dashi and Pred. I can see if that was his point. It definitely felt like his point was Dashi wasn't a winning player in that sense, which is a prevailing, I would say, almost conspiracy theory at this point, that Dashi is like incapable of contributing to actually winning Call of Duty. And people, obviously a major should give you an idea that he is capable of doing that, and just his skill in general. But we've also seen in the past with someone like Aches saying that Shotzi isn't a superstar. People are just saying really stupid stuff online, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What I'll say about the Doug thing is just, there was no reason to think that Optic could not win with this roster. I think if you had said, I don't see LAT winning this, I'll put my house on it, I'd put my house on LAT not winning anything either. with this roster, with their roster starting the season. If you wanted to say the same thing with the Boston Breach, I could see that. But Optic was undoubtedly one of the top 4 teams in the league at the beginning of the season, and they obviously have proved to be even better than just a top 4 team. So I mean, it's also kind of like that's just the idea with some of these guys. They go on podcasts, they say something ridiculous or something a little bit inflammatory, particularly about Optic, and that's just how things go. I guess it's annoying, but I'm glad that Doug isn't actually homeless. Hopefully, he can find a good home for himself.
I'll just say the only thing, like I don't know the context or even the timing around really when he said that, right? Because like you bring up like comparing it to New York and Atlanta's rosters. Like I don't remember exactly how roster mania went down. I feel like New York was kind of late or after uh, Optic because there was like that whole thing of like Priesta wanting to resign, and it was like reported there was contract negotiations and whatnot there. So I don't remember the timeline, but like regardless of what was going on behind the scenes and what was happening at the time when he made this statement, I just think, yeah, there's a lot of talent there. You can make the argument that, it might not work for ABC reasons, and if you believe in those reasons, then good for you. But I think he made a good point there. It's not like if he had bet his house on LAG not winning a tournament this year, it'd be a little different than Optic with 4 guys who have pretty good gun skill and have top talent in the league. World champion in Kenny. Uh, Fred won one tournament with Seattle, or did he win 2? I can't. Might have only been 1. Um, and then obviously Shotzi and Dashi did it before, so it's again, it's not like betting the house on a team that has no chance whatsoever. And if that's what he thought. Yeah. End of the day, it doesn't really matter what happened now because point Optic Major 3 champs, and now we can look ahead to Major 4 and see if they're able to keep it up.
Okay. You want to start the Major 4 predictions, or do you want to?
Well, I know you wanted to talk about that Ben thing, so.
Well, I'm a little less enthusiastic now that we've actually, it's been a week or so, but I don't really have like a solution, and I'd love to hear if you have an idea. But this was something that Ben tweeted, I think, like right after the major ended last Sunday. He said, quote, "Owners and league trolling the fans if we don't get a better online format next season. We want to see more top team battles, not some awkward 7-game qualifier stage." For me, I agree. Online Call of Duty, it sucks. I don't necessarily care about the competitive aspect of it. Like that's not something that worries me because it doesn't affect me. I'm not in the trenches, so to speak, trying to fight off someone who has, 20 less ping than me. But for me, it's just there's no atmosphere. There's no kind of like, it feels like there's no stakes a lot of times. Obviously, that will change with these upcoming qualifiers because there are a lot of stakes. Each win actually means something. I don't know how you can replicate that across an entire season, and I don't think there is a way to replicate that across an entire season because the NFL probably has the most interesting regular season because there are only 17 games. But even then, like one game in the middle of the season will not make or break a season in that moment. Obviously, in hindsight, yes, you losing that week 6 game actually was a big deal. But if you are 5-1 and then you lose another game in the NFL, it's not the end of the world. I just don't know how you could honestly, put that into the CDL where one, you're satisfying the players who have been very vocal about there being too few matches or at least like, going to a tournament and only playing one match. So you're balancing that, and you're also balancing the idea of like if you play too many matches, then by default the matches mean less by themselves. And the more you play, the less they mean on an individual basis. So I'm not sure how you balance that or if there is a way to balance that. I've had the idea that everything is basically a tournament where you're always kind of moving forward, and you can do that from the very first event. Just base it on the previous season's final standings, where you have, you say, you split the teams up into two groups and you do a little bit of group play, then you do a tournament. You can do that in probably a weekend. If you want to split it over multiple weekends, I think you can. I don't think the online portion is necessarily the worst part. It's just that there isn't a fan, there aren't fans, which obviously we'll see with Major Four as well. There won't be fans. And it's just that each match kind of feels a little bit meaningless at times. I don't know if you have any thoughts or any suggestions on that kind of stuff.
So I don't know if it's necessarily tied to this discussion or not exactly, but one thing I've seen in the community, I think Breaking Point even like posted a poll on it, um, is the return of 2Ks and 5Ks, which for those who don't know, uh, feels like way back in the day at this point, but now, I mean, they were pretty
Five
prominent in
years, six
AW
years.
and Ghosts, but they've been around in different capacities over the years before really the CDL started. Um, were these online tournaments that, say a 2K tournament that was you're playing for 2K points for the players, and those points obviously helped for your seedings at the open events and whatnot. And when there were open events, it was the difference between being in those 16 teams to automatically make pool play versus having to fight through the open portion or the gauntlet as it's known today, the pit, whatever you call it. I feel like one of the things I mentioned either last episode or in a previous episode is um, getting to a point where there's one of LAN event for each team in the CDL. So right now we have the 12
Mm-hmm.
teams. If there were 12 LANs for each of those teams, that could be a way you were able to completely remove the online portion of the season. Um, but if you're able to do that, then that gets rid of potentially the online matches, and brings what you're mentioning. People want to see the tournament action. They want to be involved and be at these LAN events and whatnot. Obviously, there are massive cost implications and whatnot involved in running that many events. So a potential middle ground there would be like 6 LAN events. Half the teams host it one year, half the teams host it the other year, and then you sprinkle in some 2K and 5K tournaments in between those LAN events instead of these online pool play. They're not even pool play matches; they're just group play matches at that point. But you have like a tournament esque online segment in as opposed to these just Carolina playing LAG and having only 5,000 people watching it
Mm-hmm.
on a Friday afternoon. So that's one potential idea. I mean, there were major issues with the 2Ks and 5Ks that I think some people are looking at this with like rose
Yeah.
tinted glasses or
People
whatever.
hated them.
Yes, and there were problems, cheating and whatnot, and
Yes. It'd be worse
there
now too.
especially there were times where like Optic is the 1 seed playing against 4 random kids and they're winning 250-0 in the hard point, 6-0 in the search. Um, and all that. So I think there would have to be tweaks to it, and you could argue that if we have do a 2K with the 12 CL teams and it's in that tournament structure, then you're avoiding some of those other issues. The other problem with the 5Ks was like waiting for buys and rounds. Like when you Optic finishes their round 1 match, they gotta wait for like the 512th seed and 511th seed to play their match, and then you gotta wait for all the round 1 matches to end before you play round 2, etc. But with a smaller number of teams, if it was just the CDL team, could in theory, um, run a better 2K or 5K. There's some of those examples that we were just talking about, but yeah, end of the day, I think that is one of the um, potential solutions here is, instead of just having team A versus team B at Y time on any given day for the online qualifier matches, able to bring in some form of tournament for a weekend instead. I mean, you could in theory get rid of the Fridays and just do the tournament like, first couple rounds on Saturday and then like top 4 on Sundays for an online tournament. You do that for a week, take a week off, and then you have a LAN event, and you repeat that like 6 times potentially. Then you have champs after that. I don't know. That's one idea that just comes to mind, and again, that's based on. I feel like there's been some talk about the 2Ks and 5Ks in the tournament. I mean, you could even, and that's you want to do 2Ks and 5Ks. I know there were 10Ks at one point too. You could even set it up to have like first week of a month is a 1K, second week of a month is a 2K, and then third week you have off, fourth week you go to the LAN, and then like maybe middle of the season it goes to a 2K, a 5K, and then a LAN, and then maybe like right before the end of the season you do a 5K, a 10K, and then a LAN, something like that. I don't know. You'd obviously have to have people smarter than me and with way more experience in tournament management trying to figure it out. But I do think uh, a long-winded way of us both kind of agreeing that finding a tournament-esque solution or replacement for just the online qualifier matches with like a set schedule is potentially one way to improve the online experience if they want to.
Yeah, I think in general online's going to stay. Like
Yes.
everybody
Yeah.
can talk about it however they want, but it's unrealistic to think that Microsoft would be like, "You know what we're going to do? We're going to lose a bunch of more money by putting on these these games on LAN versus online." All right, like let's be real with ourselves. These are going to be online matches. There are going to be online matches probably for the rest of however long the Call of Duty League or whatever the Call of Duty World League is. The the way to like I think it's really difficult, like I said, to create some kind of format that's going to serve the players and the fans. What I think could happen and what I think should happen is one, and it's not even like the actual matches related, because in a way you can't make every match feel important, but the stuff in between, right? Like when I really got into Call of Duty, like from 2013 to like 2015, that was like when I was like my my deepest into COD esports. There was so much content for me to watch as a fan. There were so many options. Every pro player pretty much was streaming, whether it was eights, whether it was game battles. Obviously, there were 360 icons back in the day, which dates both of us, I think. There were, anything. There were S&D tournaments, obviously. All that stuff pretty much doesn't exist the way that it did back in the day. Obviously, game battles just literally does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
And 360 icons does not exist. S&D tournaments are so, far gone from like the importance that they used to hold. And even Money 8s have pretty much gone by the wayside. Like I I don't know if that's a players thing or if that's like, I know that at one point the league had tried to kind of get rid of it because it wasn't like a CDL sanctioned event, which is stupid. Don't be stupid. It's like literally, like, I understand if you're the NBA and you don't want LeBron James going to his local park to play basketball against some strangers and potentially tearing his ACL. I understand that point of view. But if you're saying that Shotzi can't play Money 8s with other pro or challengers players for, I would have to be given a really, really good reason why that isn't the case. Do you think it actually means more for Shotzi to play in the CDL if he can't play in Money 8s? I feel like that's a ridiculous statement.
I think it was the gambling aspect of it. Like,
well, we live in a world where sports gambling is very legal now.
I think that was the issue at that time, because I remember when they were trying to do it, like they were like players were being like, we're playing for handshake. It might not have even been hand. They had some funny term that they were like, yeah, we got 100 handshakes on this. They were trying to work around it. So I believe the money aspect is the bigger. There have been, even as recent as this year, I feel like off season following their game, like I know Zuma and the flank were trying to run a tournament. The CDL's like you can only have 2 players from the same CDL team on a team for this event because we don't want to have these full CDL teams playing in a non-CDL event.
My
So
blood
I
pressure is
know
rising as you're talking.
there have been, regardless of what the mindset is or the rules around it, there have been instances of this stuff happening as recent as this past year, and I don't know what the answer.
So, to kind of sum it up, what I would like is I don't know what the schedule should be. I think if you just did a little mini tournament every weekend, which is kind of what the first home series were in
Yeah,
2020, um, I think if you do something like that, I think that honestly works the best for that weekend, even if it is online. But the stuff in between matters so much too. Right now we don't have anything from Monday to Wednesday in the CDL really. And even then, like sometimes those matches are so boring and so spaced out from Thursday to Sunday that we really don't have that much going on Thursday to Sunday.
yeah.
What if we, like you said, bring back 2K, 5K, 10K, whatever you want to call it, however much money and points you want to put on it, and incorporate challengers. And you don't need I don't think Bimmy Jimmy from, Arkansas, who can barely put his thumbs on the controller, I don't think he deserves necessarily, or that we need to have him be playing against Optic in an online tournament. But what if we just took the Challengers Elite teams? There's 12 of them. There's 12 CDL teams. Put them in a bracket, put them in group play, however you want to format it, and have a 2 days, 3 days of just online competition. Everybody can stream it. Obviously, there will be the CDL broadcast, but everybody can make content out of this. Everybody can kind of benefit from, obviously the Challengers players who literally are only playing against Challengers players 95% of the time. Now they're streaming a game against Optic. Obviously, you should encourage these people to stream their games because nobody cares about your hardpoint rotations, and stop. I just want teams to understand that it's very important for you to build a brand because nobody cares about your challengers team in general. That's why I watched Temp for pretty much the first few months of the season, was because he kept streaming his scrims. And I was like, this is cool. Like, I like watching competition. I like watching these teams actually play against each other. Everybody should stream these games, and everybody should be cool with, maybe their strategies being taken and maybe copied at some point. I just think there should be more content to fill in. And obviously, what I wanted to say last was Breaking Point did the BPL over the off season, where they had a bunch of players kind of doing money eights in a sense, which is based on FPL and ESEA in CSGO. I think that's the perfect way to go about it. Something for pro players to feel like exclusive, and that we get to see these new players and new teams, and there's actually some kind of competition. But yeah, I think what happens in the between matches is almost more important than what happens out, in the actual matches, and obviously those are important as well. But yeah, it's obviously there are a lot of different opinions and probably a lot of different suggestions being thrown out in Microsoft or in the CDO.
One thing I will say, I think the last thing talk on this, and I think it is important to bring up because I was just, reminded of it when you were mentioning like bringing in the challengers and kind of like that open-esque format. Is we have to keep in mind, just as when was this announced? It was April 26th, so just over a month ago. The CDL announced it's like, major news for this year and the upcoming seasons with like the forgiveness of entry fees and whatnot. Is there could be massive changes to the CDL as we know it, even beyond just like the online versus LAN debate, right? Like people are saying that this move could in theory, open up the circuit to more teams, bring in expansion. It's something we've been talking about for years. Um, and it's just there's a lot of uncertainty. I think there was a lot of uncertainty around the CDL as a whole heading into this season with the whole Overwatch League situation and whatnot. People worrying the CDL was going to be done away with after this, and this was going to be the final year. We get this announcement last month. seems like the CDL is here to stay, but there are still questions around what the format could look like, how many teams are going to be involved, a whole bunch of stuff. So this is going to be a topic, uh, even beyond just like the online portion of it and whatnot. We're going to have a lot to talk about over these months, especially in the fall, after this season ends, where hopefully. But I feel like it's safe bet we're going to get some reports around roster moves, obviously, and then could be some potential reports as Yell, Activision, Microsoft, whoever, start to iron out what the 2025 season could look like. And there could be some massive differences even beyond just this whole online debate that we've had for a good time. So something to keep in mind too for our listeners.
Yeah, and the last thing is just it really depends on what the CDL and the fans want the CDL to be. Do they want it to be endurance based, where it's about grinding through tournaments over a weekend, which is back in the day that's what they did, or what the format is now, where you play one maybe two matches in a weekend, and that's just kind of how it goes. If you want to be endurance based, then that's your preference. If you want it to be more of a traditional sports league and have this kind of set opponent for the weekend, then that's what you have now, really. So I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more after the season. And after the season is coming pretty quickly. I think we're only about a month and a half or so away from the off season, and the off season is pretty cool usually, at least the first month or so. And then teams just decide that they won't announce rosters for 3 months, which is infuriating. But yeah, we'll talk about it more in the offseason. Let's get to Major 4 Week 1 predictions. We're about an hour into the show. Obviously, we've talked about a lot of non-match stuff, but qualifiers are here. They are coming up this coming weekend, May 31st to June 2nd. And these qualifiers are packed because of the change in schedule. Major 4 was supposed to be hosted by Carolina. That did not happen, and it will be in Burbank with no fans. So they changed around the qualifying schedule, and this is definitely the busiest qualifying stretch that we've had so far this season. And this will be kind of we'll get to see what teams are really made of in this, I think, because the schedule is a lot more intense in terms of how many online matches there are per week and how many fans are ready for this many online matches. But we're starting on Friday, May 31st. Seattle versus Toronto, Minnesota versus Boston, Carolina versus LAG. Starting with the Surge and Ultra, I think you have to go with the Ultra, coming off of a pretty impressive Major 3.
Yeah, I'm going with Toronto here too.
Minnesota versus Boston. Obviously, this is going to be the debut of Major Maniac with the Boston Breach. But I'm going to say that Boston's going to lose their 11th straight match and that the Minnesota Rock are going to win.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about revenge matches in the past. Obviously, there's a little bit of a revenge match element here with Major Maniac, but it's not, necessarily him coming off of the Rocker or whatnot. So it's a little different, and Priest has got the history of the Rocker too. So, yeah, I think this is definitely, we've talked about it. I know I've personally said it multiple times with these roster changes throughout this season. When you make a roster change, you don't want to be playing a team like Atlanta or Optic or Toronto, New York. You want to be playing one of these other teams in the bottom half of the league.
You want to play Minnesota?
Yeah, this is a realistic opportunity for Boston to win, and it's a favorable matchup for a new roster. They have an opportunity to make something happen here. I will say that the whole theory behind Major Mania coming in helping with Search, we did just see at the last Major Standy, I think it was 17 kills in Search, and that was the only map Minnesota won on land. So could be a tough matchup in that, just S&D regard. But regardless, this is definitely a winnable matchup for Boston. I'm still going to pick Minnesota.
Carolina versus LAG. I mean, LAG, they didn't even have their land bump this time. They kind of used up all their powers in their whatever 1 or 2 online wins last stage. I'm going to go with Carolina. I think they're just a little more consistent, even if that is kind of a baffling statement just in general with the Ravens.
Yep, I'm gonna go with Carolina here too.
Saturday, June 1st, we have 4 matches. We have the Battle of LA to start, LAT versus LAG. I will pick LAG just for because LAG literally is like all but
I was
one, I
gonna think if
think.
you picked LAT, I think I was gonna switch. So I'm glad we were having a difference here.
Yeah, this is a weird matchup
A
because
trap game.
yeah,
Trap game.
LAT literally
Yep.
cannot beat them. I think they've
Nope.
only beat them one time in franchise history, so I'm gonna go with LAG. Probably gonna lose this one though.
Good for you. I like it. I'll take LAT. So you got a different. Battle of LA has historically been LAG. Might have an edge here.
Vegas's week from hell begins here. They play the Toronto Ultra. I will be going with the Toronto Ultra.
Same.
Miami versus Optic. Yeah, I think I might have to go with Optic.
Yeah, I will take Optic as well.
And New York versus Carolina. This is kind of a not like a no-brainer just because the Subliners haven't been like the most confident team to pick. But I still have to pick them in this case, so I'm gonna go with the Subliners.
Yeah, I'll take New York too, but it definitely is. I feel like I've said it since Major 1, where Carolina did beat New York every time they faced off since then. Like, it is in the back of the mind that Carolina has beaten New York, and when we talk about these matchups of the bottom 8 versus the top 4, this is one that sticks out to me as like a matchup that we've seen Carolina hang with New York and in fact beat them. So could be some upset potential here, but I will take New York.
I think we're gonna agree on all of Sunday's matches. Sunday, June 2nd, we got Minnesota versus Seattle. I'm not really feeling Minnesota at the moment, so I'm gonna go with the Surge.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have picked Minnesota potentially against any team other than Boston.
Yeah,
So
same.
I'm not super confident in them, so I'll take Seattle.
Boston versus LAT, same with Boston. Even if I'm picking LAG over LAT, I can't pick in good conscience Boston against anybody at this point.
Oh, yeah, I gotta go with LAT.
Atlanta versus New York. I'm going to be very obviously super interested in this match because I just want to see what Atlanta, how they respond to kind of falling on their face a little bit in S&D at Major 3. And this is obviously kind of, I'm interested to see why this isn't the final match on Sunday. Usually they put the big match as the last one. Maybe they did, but we're just kind of overlooking it.
And then they had to add the matches added at the end.
Yeah, so I'll go with Atlanta, but this is definitely the match of the week.
Yeah, agreed. Gonna take FaZe here as well. It is worth mentioning though with New York, they have that matchup with Carolina and Atlanta here. If Carolina is able to pull off the upset, and as we think Atlanta takes care of business of New York, New York has that potential to start 0-2 again. We know they kind of dug themselves a hole last major qualifiers, were able to make winners bracket in top 4 through it all, but just something to keep in mind, see if they're able to, avoid that or if it's history repeating itself again.
And last match, Vegas versus Optic. Obviously, Optic.
Yeah, I will take Optic too.
And just a reminder on our pick'ems, you're 123 and 57. I'm 119 and 61, and Trimmer is 0-1. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, really wherever you're getting your podcast. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. You can like the videos on YouTube. And I've seen, we've had, I think, a few comments over the past week or two on our YouTube videos. Really, really supportive people, and I really appreciate all of that. Bink does as well. It's honestly great to see people that obviously we don't know these people at all, and they're just coming to our YouTube videos and saying like, keep up the good work. Really like the podcast. That kind of stuff means a ton, and we really appreciate it. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. Next show will be sometime early next week. So I'll be out of town for work until I'll be coming back on Sunday. So I won't obviously be watching the matches as they happen Thursday or Friday through really Sunday. So it might be Sunday we'll play it by ear. But obviously, if you follow the podcast feed or if you follow our Twitters, you'll see when we tweet about when we're going live on Twitch. So obviously that's the best way to keep updated on what's going on with the podcast. But we will be back at some point early next week to talk about all of these matches and then preview week 2 of the Major 4 qualifiers. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for the support. You kind of alluded to it, but I wanted to shout out in particular one of the comments from last week's video on YouTube, which is one of our best videos view-wise so far of this current season, at least. At RG-Reactor on YouTube said, shout out to both of you for putting in this grind. Keep pushing, boys. You will get what you deserve soon. I just thought that was a really wholesome comment. I really appreciate it too, how much you like it. So shout out to you, RG Reactor. Appreciate you leaving the comment, watching, supporting the videos and the channel and all that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, getting to the end of the season, but we still got some matches to grind through, and looking forward to bringing you guys all the comments. So even got any feedback or whatnot, feel free to leave it in the comments. And you got any other comments or stuff you want to gas us up a little, definitely feel do that too. I'm not gonna dislike that at all. So thank you guys as always for all the support, and remember to send the chow.